Hey, welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name is Megan and I'm a professional writer, editor, and published author. I'm trying something new with this video, kind of a different aesthetic or vibe. Normally I just record myself yapping in an empty bedroom upstairs, but anyhow, let me know what you think about this. Today I'm sharing an update on my query journey for my last finished manuscript, Chasing Ghosts, which is a paranormal horror. I'm not going to talk about how to write a query letter. There are endless resources on that already. Rather, I'm going to tell you about my recent experiences working with two agents who are also freelance editors and what type of feedback they gave me. From here on out, I'm just going to refer to them as editors, but just know that they are primarily agents, and I went for agents who are also editors on purpose. I wanted feedback from their perspective. For context, I sent my first query letter for Chasing Ghosts on January 22nd of this year. As of this recording, I've sent approximately 40 queries and I've received about 20 passes and no requests for partials or fulls, which means that no agent has asked to see more of my manuscript. This is not my first manuscript and I've sent hundreds of query letters. However, we all know how subjective and saturated this industry is. After around roughly the 30th manuscript, I paused because I decided it was a good time to test a different version of my query letter. There's an agent I follow on Twitter, on X. I've been following her for a long time, and I already knew that she offers editing services. So I reached out to her and ultimately sent her my query letter, synopsis, and the first 3 chapters of my book. Mind you, once you pay an agent for any services on the side, you can no longer pitch them. So I went to this person purely for her editing services. The feedback she got back to me with was, in the grand scheme of things, very minor, I thought, but not in a bad way. In fact, I was like, if my query package is this solid, why am I not hearing back from any agents? So it was like good, but it also had me kind of scratching my head a little bit. The feedback she gave me was more specific to my manuscript. The one suggestion she gave that might apply to you was to have more recent comparable titles. And I'm going to come back to this a little later in this video. She was great, no complaints. I still wanted a second opinion, not to replace what she gave me, but to add to it. There was another agent and editor who came highly recommended by a Twitter friend of mine, so I also paid her to review the same material, my query package, and that is when my mind was blown. The first thing she suggested was that I shorten the summary portion of my query letter fairly significantly. Now, in Chasing Ghosts, there is a death, an accident that happened 20 years ago that helps explain my protagonist and the journey that he goes on. There's a bit of backstory that's really important for the reader to have, and I tried to squeeze that into my query letter so that the agent would understand as well. My query letter still fell within the general recommended word count, but this editor told me that ideally you drop the agent into the moment when the story opens. Mine opens in present day, not 20 years ago. So what this means is that it's possible that even though my query letter wasn't too long in terms of the word count, it was still taking too long to get to the point, which makes me wonder, have agents read the whole query? Or did I spend too many sentences on backstory and they just lost interest? I know to keep query letters concise, but I added those details in because I was worried that without them, an agent would be like, well, this doesn't make any sense, who cares? This editor emphasized stakes and what will happen if my protagonist doesn't go on this adventure, basically. So I trimmed a decent amount relative to the total length of the query letter and then upped the stakes. I think this is the shortest query letter I've ever had, which personally, that's exciting for me because it's something new that I haven't tried, and maybe this is exactly what I needed to kind of get me over that next hurdle. Next thing she pointed out that might be helpful for you as well was my comps. I want to talk about this for a minute because I feel like authors sometimes rush through this part of the query letter, myself included. Comps, or comparable titles, are meant to help an agent or publisher understand where your book fits in the market. The trick that I think a lot of us are taught is to imagine you walk into a bookstore and you find your book on the shelf. What books would yours be next to? Those might make good comps. Agents need this because they need to determine, number one, is there a place in the market for your book? In other words, can they sell it? And number two, if there is a place, where is that? In all the research I've done, there are a few cardinal sins that we authors tend to commit. One is saying that there are no comps because my book is one of a kind and nothing like it has ever existed. One, you're probably wrong. And two, this is not a plus. Agents won't see this and be like, oh, I've struck gold. No, they will immediately pass. It's a huge red flag. This is not my opinion. You can ask any agent. Another mistake is using comps that are old. The general consensus I've seen is to pick books that were published within the last 5 years. I messed this up and I used comps older than that and didn't think it was a big deal. It's important that they're recent because the market changes. Agents need to know if there's an audience, a demand for your book now. What was successful 10 years ago or whatever, it's not a good enough indication. And the third mistake is picking the wrong comps and or not explaining why you picked them. Here's what I learned. You don't need to find comps that are exactly like your book. You need to find ones that have something big in common with your book. For instance, one of my comps is Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. It was published in 2021, and the plot is quite different from mine, from Chasing Ghosts. However, they have two big things in common. They're both set in small, creepy towns with disturbing pasts, and they both have this theme of having to uncover secrets after someone has died. Another comp I started using is The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kist. I think that's how you say it. This was published last year, so 2024. I actually learned about this from an agent I pitched at the Denver Writing Conference, which I talked about in this video. She reps that author. And when I pitched her my book, she was like, oh, it kind of sounds like this book. Not only was it a great story, but from a market standpoint, it just really resonated with me and my story and helped me understand a few things about this genre. It's a perfect comp for Chasing Ghosts because both involve the protagonist literally going back in time and fixing the past to save their present and their future. So I swapped my comps for two that were more recent and explained more specifically what Chasing Ghosts has in common with them. When I say I explain this more in my query letter, I mean like a sentence, okay? I didn't write an epic novel. I'm not currently doing this, but I've heard that some authors also use movies as comps. I have heard that this is okay, but I would be careful. If you include like 2 or 3 comps in your query, which is kind of the rule of thumb, like if you have 2 comps, make one of them a book. I wouldn't use 2 movies. If you have 3 comps, personally, I would do 2 books and 1 movie. The purpose of this is to see where you fit in the publishing industry, not the film industry. So the editor's comments on my comps were very helpful and required me to do a little more detective work, but I'm glad they called it out. And I think this will make a difference. I hope it will. There was one more huge piece of advice that may or may not apply to you, but I'm going to share it just in case. Chasing Ghosts has a prologue where you learn what happened 20 years ago. I was super proud of it, but then I kept hearing that agents hate prologues. So I tweaked it, I tweaked the wording, and I turned it into chapter 1. This second editor told me to turn it back into a prologue. What I learned about why some agents don't like prologues is that it's not the prologue itself, but rather how we, authors, use them. I guess that very often authors use them for stuff that's not vital to the plot and or they're just info dumping, which I talk about in this video. I never felt that way about my prologue. I'm really confident that it's important and it's also fairly short, but I was still worried that when I was sending agents my sample chapters, they were taking one look at it and as soon as they saw prologue, they bounced. This editor again suggested that I revert chapter 1 to a prologue, but then when I send sample chapters, start with chapter 1, not the prologue. And agents typically ask for the first 3 or 5 chapters. Problem solved. I never would have thought to do this. Never. I don't know why, but I never would have thought of this. And I was so relieved because I never liked my prologue as a first chapter. And in fact, after I made that switch, one of my beta readers was like, this is giving prologue vibes. And I wanted to be like, it was a prologue, but I wasn't going to remove that part completely. It was going to be a prologue or the first chapter, no matter what. I was keeping it. And I'm relieved that I can make it work as the prologue. If you have a prologue, don't jump the gun and assume that the approach would be the same for you. I think that in my case, it was largely due to the prologue being 2 decades in the past. I think that's the differentiating factor. I can see under other circumstances how this situation could be different. Or maybe you do have a prologue that should be a chapter 1. I don't know. I'm just saying, you know, every book is different. Once she said it, it clicked, and it completely makes sense why agents don't need to see the prologue in the first place when I send them those sample chapters. Hiring editors, particularly editors who are agents, has been invaluable to me. This is the first time I've paid for reviews of my query package, and I learned some new things. There is one more editor I might hit up, but I'm going to pause for now, give querying a little more time, and see if my results changed based on the latest edits that I made. You have to test before you iterate again, or you have no way of knowing, you know, what works and what doesn't. If this version of my query letter starts getting me some responses, I'm going to be intrigued purely because it's so much shorter than I ever would have thought to make it. If I start to get responses, it's going to be validation that the revisions, the edits I got on the query package were. If it's within your means, hire an editor to review your query package. Both editors I worked with were, in my opinion, very affordable and fairly priced. I understand that this is coming from a place of privilege, but I am also comparing what they charged me to what other editors quoted me. I did get a few quotes on Reedsy, and I'm sure those folks are great, no shade, but I requested quotes from 2, and they were roughly $500 and $800, which no. I mean, if you're fine dropping that kind of money, go for it, but that made me a little uneasy. I'm lying, it made me very uneasy. The editors I worked with were both under $200, I believe, and again, they reviewed my query letter, my synopsis, and the first 3 chapters. Oh my God, they were amazing. Worth every penny, and I will definitely want to work with them again in the future. So that's where I'm at right now. I've really been heads down on chasing ghosts, partly because I took a break from my fantasy novel, which has a name now. It has a name. It's called The First Forge. And I just recently finished the first draft, and I've got a video on that as well. I plotted and wrote this in about 3 months, which is very fast for me, and then I took a break. I took a break for a little over a week to rest my eyes, and then time to edit. The timing worked out perfectly though, because I really needed a moment to kind of go back to chasing ghosts and focus on that uninterrupted. It was hard not to touch my fantasy novel for a week. I'm very stubborn, but I've learned it's nice to have 2 books going at once. It's hard, and typically my brain wouldn't work like that. I like to focus on one thing, but when I'm not working on one, I'm working on the other, and it's worked out well for me. I hope you learned something new in this video. Again, I would love your feedback on the style. I was just trying to mix it up a little bit. Thanks for being here as always. Drop me a comment to say hello. Let me know your thoughts on what I discussed today. Give me an update on your book. And of course, if you have any requests for future videos, I would love to hear them. See you next time.